Thank you very much, Renu, and thank all of you very much indeed for taking the time and trouble to come. I can see from a lot of the faces in the audience, it isn't just our wonderful speakers who have traveled distances to be with us today, but many people who are attending have also had to come quite a distance to be here at this event. And it is very, very heartening to see you in the audience. Thank you very much indeed. It is a huge pleasure for me to be involved once again with the Aesthetics Project and to be organizing a symposium for them. It was with enormous pleasure that I attended the first symposium that was organized by this project 3 years ago. This is the third that we have in this series. The first one was very ably organized by Pramod Kumar, a remarkable force in the art and cultural heritage scene in India today. And he got this off to a splendid start. Last year, I considered myself very fortunate to be asked by Renu to organize the symposium, and we chose the topic of the Deccan. And this year, it is an honor for me to be introducing the third symposium in this series. It is a matter of real personal pleasure for me to actually see a foundation like the Aesthetics Project taking an initiative of this kind. I consider myself very fortunate to be an art historian by profession, and I take enormous pleasure in my field. But the pleasure that I take is combined by my sorrow and my frustration at how small the circle is in India of people whose lives are actually touched by art history. Because here this discipline seems to really be the concern only of those who are professionally engaged in the arts or are in some way financially implicated in it. So you could be a scholar perhaps, working in a museum or a university or in the field of archaeology. You could be perhaps a journalist or a publisher. You could be a dealer or a collector. But beyond these circles of people who have a very strong reason to be engaged in art, the discipline of art history casts a very short shadow in our lives. And yet, we in India live lives where we are surrounded by great monuments. We plan our holidays around visits to tremendous historic sites. We cover our walls, or we fill our home pages and our Facebook posts with very attractive images that are drawn from India's very rich visual past. And it's great to delight in all the beauty that surrounds us, but I earnestly believe that it is not enough to only take pleasure in art without critically engaging with it. Is to consume culture, it is not to understand it. And it is to miss the opportunity to be transformed by it. For me, here lies the importance of art history. When we are drawn to beauty and we don't stop at just enjoying it, but we challenge ourselves to engage with it critically, to realize that we cannot always grasp everything intuitively just by liking something that we see, to realize that we need to educate ourselves about it, to realize that it is even right sometimes to be discomfited by what we learn about it, to have our minds changed by it or to be surprised by it, to truly recognize that the past is another country and that we cannot own it, and we must be willing to work to even approach a sense of understanding of it. It is then that we develop a relationship with the past that can really be beneficial for the present. Not useful or convenient to the present, but truly, deeply transformative and beneficial. Now, we who live in India know about the paucity of art institutions that we have around us. And we live with the irony that the major advances that are made in the history and the study of even Indian art is hardly ever accessible to us here. The major exhibitions about Indian art don't come to India. A lot of the major research on Indian art is not done here. The major conferences do not occur over here. Major scholars might come to India to do their field work, but we don't get a chance to hear them or to engage with them. And that is why I so very greatly appreciate the initiative that has been taken by the Aesthetics Project to provide a platform for art historians from India and abroad to come together and to present their work for an audience in Delhi. And I want to again express my deep appreciation and gratitude to Renu Judge for being the prime mover behind this initiative. It is wonderful to have this opportunity available to us thanks to her. This year we have chosen to focus on Gandhara, Bactria and Bamiyan for our symposium. And the very names conjure up images of very rich arts that are born. Is the projection not working? They conjure up very rich arts that are born out of very complex cultural interactions in the past. Because from very ancient times, the valleys that stretched between the Indus, which now flows mostly to Pakistan, and the Oxus, which is the Amu Darya in today's Uzbekistan, these valleys lay on the trade routes that linked China and the Mediterranean. And Gandhara and Bactria were the crossroads of the world, where east met west and north met south. And you had travelers, traders, conquerors from China, Persia, Greece, India, Central Asia, Egypt, Arabia, and the Levant. They all converged here, sometimes in conflict, sometimes in collaboration, to create layer upon layer of history. In the 4th century, before the Common Era, for example, the area was conquered by Alexander the Great. Then in the 3rd century BCE, it became the cradle of the Mauryan Empire. In the 2nd century BCE, the Scythians came from Central Asia. And then in the 1st century of the Common Era, there came the Kushanas. So this area was the center of all of these major empires, each of which left a deep impress upon the land. This area was also the incubator for ideas. It was the cradle of Zoroastrianism, but then Buddhism took root here and it flourished for many centuries. In this area of confluences, the Buddhism that developed got special characteristics. It incorporated elements from East and West to form a unique Greco-Buddhist culture, where Gandhara's cosmopolitanism brought deities and legends from the 4 corners of the world together. So the Buddha here was often shown protected by Hercules. Did I do something? The Buddha was often shown protected by Hercules. The goddess Hariti, who took care of children, was modeled upon Tyche in iconographies that were deliberately devised to unite the diverse people of the region through a shared and syncretic culture. Buddhist monasteries and Greek-style amphitheaters were the twin centers of the cities here. And at a site like Ai-Khanum, a city on the banks of the Oxus, which today lies at the edge of Afghanistan and Uzbekistan, archaeologists have found remains of palaces and amphitheaters. They have found funerary sculptures that depict beautiful classical youths. There are homes with Greek-style floor mosaics. And in a shrine there remain the colossal feet of what must have been a huge deity in a temple. And who was this god? He was Zeus Mitra, a fusion of a Greek and a Zoroastrian divinity. Now, if ideas and beliefs mix so richly in this region, then the material remains that are left buried in the soil are also uncommonly rich. And a single site in this region can yield Indian ivories, Chinese silks, Roman glass, and Grecian gold. And these material remains only reflect the cosmopolitan population that once inhabited these valleys. One of the latest flowerings of Buddhist culture in the region were the colossal Buddhas of Bamiyan, which was sponsored by a wealthy monastery that grew in riches from offering shelter to traders because it lay on one of the major routes that connected East and West. Now, because this extraordinary phenomenon that flowered here captured the minds of colonial officers in India, in many ways it is the phenomenon of Gandhara that is even responsible for the founding of archaeology in India. The earliest efforts of archaeologists in this part of the British Empire was actually prompted by the desire of some explorers to find more about this Hellenism that was in Asia, because they saw it as an outpost of the West in the East. So it was colonial interest in Greco-Buddhist art that actually prompted the founding of the Archaeological Survey of India. And several museums in India have rich collections of art from the Gandharan period. And yet, within India, these collections have fallen into oblivion. If today our newspaper headlines scream about the way in which groups in Pakistan and Afghanistan disavow Gandharan and Bactrian art or attack it for being non-Islamic, let us not forget that in India, this art was rejected decades ago by nationalist ideologues who rejected it for being the product of so-called Western influence and therefore extraneous to Indian tradition. So intolerance can take many forms, and unfortunately the art of Gandhara seems to have suffered all of them in recent times. As something that was once an intensely cosmopolitan expression that fused elements that were taken from everywhere, Gandharan and Bactrian art seems to be in danger of becoming a nowhere art in the place of its own origin. Instead, as it is unwanted at home but is desired elsewhere, in the West because of its Hellenistic appearance, or further east because of the attachment there to anything that is a manifestation of Buddhism, this art is and has been the center of a huge amount of illegal archaeology and trade. And indeed, there is good reason to believe that a lot of the acts that are represented to us as Islamic iconoclasm against Gandharan art, which supposedly destroys figurative sculpture out of a religiously inspired aversion to them, is actually a cover for making these things portable and easy to sell. The stories about the art of Gandhara, Bactria, and Bamiyan tell us a great deal about the treasures of the past, and we have wonderful scholars who have traveled all the way across the world to bring their knowledge and their insights to us about the deep, complex, syncretic history of these sites and places. But the story of Gandhara, Bactria, and Bamiyan is also a story of unfolding tragedies in the present. What we learn about these sites very richly evoke the challenges to heritage in the here and now. And so in this symposium, we will have eminent scholars and curators and activists from India and abroad who will shed light on the remarkable art and the cosmopolitan culture of Gandhara and Bactria in ancient times, but they will speak also of the recent and unfolding threats to monuments and artifacts in the current day. They'll tell us not just about the creation of some absolutely wonderful things, but also about their destruction. And if some sites and objects, such as the Bamiyan Buddhas or the collection of the Kabul Museum, we know perished through deliberate acts of destruction, we will also learn how much else is being lost as the collateral damage either of unending disturbance in the region or indeed of reckless development, which we unquestioningly accept as a good. Despite the terrible tragedies that we know about, however, I also hope that today and tomorrow will be days that bring us hope. We will hear about artifacts that were saved, we will hear about looting that was reversed, and we will hear about damage that was repaired, often through acts of rare bravery and dedication at both the local and the international level. And as we see how some incredibly courageous and committed people struggle to care for these things or bring us inspiring stories about those who have struggled for these purposes, I hope that it will inspire us in India to look again and to think afresh about the Gandharan artifacts that are languishing in our own museums. It is now my very great pleasure to introduce the first day of the symposium and to invite the first speakers. We will begin the day by delving into the deep histories and the formation of Gandharan art and the incredible religious syncretism that was forged over there, as well as the wonderful sites in which these were manifested. So it is my great pleasure to now introduce our first speaker of the day, Professor Ju Young Ri, who comes to us from Seoul National University in Korea, where he is the professor of Buddhist art history. Professor Ri did his PhD in art history at the University of California in Berkeley, and he has been teaching at Seoul ever since. His area of specialization is the Buddhist art of India, Central Asia, and Korea, and the majority of his publications look at ancient Indian art and its Central Asian outreach in the ancient period up to the 5th century, especially focusing on ancient Gandhara. He draws upon a very rich range of sources for his work, where he tries to develop a comprehensive picture of what we understand as the visual traditions through a deeper understanding of the texts and the religious practices that informed their production. It is a very great pleasure now to introduce you, sir, and to invite you to speak about the birth of Buddhist art in Gandhara. Professor G.O.T.